I love creating D&D monsters. Actually, I love just creating monsters in general, whether it's for D&D or for something else. It's been a lifelong passion of mine. So whether I'm making a monster that is for a D&D adventure or for my newsletter or one of my RPG books, or maybe just for fun, it's something that I put a lot of thought into. It's something that I practice on a very regular basis. Actually, I've been continuously studying D&D rules and practicing monster creation since the early 2000s. So yeah, a big interest of mine. So I'd like to share with you some steps on how to make a great monster. Now, some of these guidelines are going to be specific to 5th edition D&D, but others are going to be tips and advice that I think you could apply to practically any RPG system. So there are many different approaches to monster design. There are many different ways that you could do this. I'm going to do my best to condense things down into just 2 main methods. The first one is a simple method, and the second one is a complex method. The simple method we could also call the derivative method because you're deriving your monster from an existing official monster. You're basically just repurposing it, reskinning it, tinkering with it a little bit, but it can be very fast. And then the second method, the more complex one, we could call the from scratch method, because even if you do use official monsters as like a point of reference, you're still building the whole creature from scratch, from the beginning. You're doing everything yourself. Now, there are pros and cons on both sides of it. The simple method or derivative method is a lot faster. In fact, it could be basically as fast as you want it to be. And then the more complex method, the from scratch method, it is way more detailed. You'll have to learn at least some basic guidelines, or at least reference some guideline tables. It takes longer, it takes some more thought, but it allows you all that creative control. You can really customize the exact monster that you want. That's what I do most of the time, is make things from scratch. That allows me to really dive deep into the monstrous goodness. But regardless of whichever route you take, whatever design approach you want to use, it is good to start with a concept first. I highly encourage you to put some amount of thought into the concept of the creature at the beginning. Now, a lot of times that is just going to come naturally to you, so you're not going to have to worry about it too much. But if you can take some time and think about some certain questions, some certain aspects of the monster, it really is going to help in all kinds of ways. It even is going to help you on the mechanics side of things, because the best monsters have mechanics. They have features and special abilities that express their concept, that express their theme and their style. I've written down some example questions that you could think about when conceptualizing your monster. You could answer any of these that you want. You don't have to do all of them. You really don't ever have to do any of them. But again, this is something that I recommend. It helps things in kind of every way as you go along the different steps of this process. What is this monster? What does it look like? What does it do? What role would it fill in an adventure or in a fantasy world? How would it behave during a combat encounter? Where does it live? What kind of personality or temperament does it have? How intelligent is it? How dangerous is it? What kind of strengths or weaknesses does it have? What kind of special abilities or traits or powers does it have? So you get the point. It all starts with the concept. At a bare minimum, I would say the concept needs to do 2 things from the very beginning here. What is the theme of the monster? And what is the CR, the challenge rating of the monster? If you can at least just have those 2 things, you're going to be heading in a pretty good direction. And of course, you can always edit things and change things around as you go along. So let's start here. I'm going to walk through the 2 different methods. Let's start with a concept, and then I will create this monster 2 times, once for each of these 2 methods that I've mentioned. So I gave this a little bit of thought, and the theme that is coming to my mind is an aquatic monster. It's vaguely humanoid. It's a kind of a scary thing, I think, and it latches onto ships. It tries to sink ships. Maybe it wants to plunder the ships. Maybe it wants to eat the drowned people. Maybe it's just a nasty, malicious thing that just wants to wreak havoc It probably goes after more than just ships and boats. Maybe that's what it's most well known for, but I would imagine it also affecting like seaside locations and coastal towns and such. Maybe folk could tell scary stories or kind of boogeyman, folkloric legends about this creature. The mental image that I'm getting is a kind of medium-sized, kind of person-like thing. I'm going to just use the working name aquatic gremlin. That's, I think, close enough to the theme that I have in mind. Challenge rating wise, I don't think this monster is incredibly strong. I think it's something that a low-level party could face, and a mid-level party maybe could face a group of them. So I'm thinking like CR2. You know, it's stronger than a goblin, but it's not as strong as like a giant or a dragon or something. It's a monster that could potentially sink a ship, but it would need some kind of prolonged effort. Like maybe it's latched onto the ship overnight, wearing holes in the hull. But it's not like a dragon turtle that could just wreck an entire ship throughout the course of a single combat encounter. Alright, so let's get into actually creating this aquatic gremlin creature. We'll start with a simple method, aka the derivative method. This is essentially a reskin. You're going to find a creature that's already in the monster manual, already in one of the bestiaries, something that's just vaguely similar mechanics-wise or stats-wise, and then you'll give it a different appearance. You'll maybe add or change or tinker with a few of the traits. That's basically it. Okay, so I've been looking through my trusty monster manual, and actually in the NPCs section, there is the bandit captain at CR2. Interestingly, his appearance is kind of pirate-like or kind of maritime or coastal in a way, so I think it's just kind of a coincidence. And I think this vaguely works. So I'll take this bandit captain stat block. I'm going to swap the studded leather for natural armor. I'll give it a swim speed and probably a climb speed as well, since this thing really latches on or maybe climbs up the sides of lighthouses or buildings in little coastal towns, or maybe, climbs up sea mounts and seaside rocks. I'm going to change the scimitar and the dagger weapons to some kind of natural weapons. This parry reaction that he has, that could be changed to some kind of like elusive maneuver that still has the same effect, basically. The intelligence and the charisma scores are probably just a little bit too high, but I could make those like a 7 or a 9 apiece. I think that's it, really. This already is going to work for our aquatic gremlin. You could put a sticky note in your monster manual. You could make a few notes on your notes document. I like to use a laptop for in-person or my desktop for online play. Or if you're confident, just mentally note it all and improvise and run things on the fly. Speaking of which, I think these natural weapons are going to be claws, and then it has like a radula, like a sort of slug or squid tongue thing that has all those spikes that like scrape and saw away at stuff. So that's basically it for the derivative method or the reskin. It's something that you can do really fast. It might just take you a few minutes or maybe 10 minutes at the most. Another upside of this method is that you already know the statistics of the creature have been developed and play tested, so it's already a trustworthy stat block. Well, as trustworthy as any official stat block can be. So now let's move on to building this aquatic gremlin thing using the complex method, the from scratch method. We're going to build this guy from the ground up. At this point, I would really suggest coming up with the name of the creature. You could keep using a placeholder name or even just X and figure that out later, and that's fine. But if you can come up with a name now and a name that somehow fits the style or the aesthetic or the feeling of the monster, even better. So I thought about this for a little bit, and the name that I'm going to go with is Ofeo. I'm deriving this from the words o feio or o feio from Portuguese, which literally means the ugly or the ugly one. I think it's a fitting name because this is like a grotesque monster, something that sailors and seaside folk would tell scary stories about. Also, Portugal and Brazil to an extent does have a long maritime history and a lot of coastal associations with their cultures, so that's fitting. Also, Ofeo just sounds right. The Ofeo. I build a lot of monsters and NPCs from scratch, so I have a template that I use. I'll go ahead and link that. I think I'll post it on my Patreon, and there'll be a link down in the video description where you can go and grab that template if you would like. I find it just very helpful and handy to make copies of that whenever I'm creating a new creature. While you're getting the template, make sure to have a look at my Patreon. Consider signing up. There's all kinds of content that I release every month. There's a monthly newsletter called Scrolls of the Bard. There are RPG maps. I do drawings every month, and people whose names get drawn get to pick from some really cool rewards. There's just a whole bunch of cool stuff on there. If you want, you can even sign up as a free member. Either way, your support is highly valued. So I've got a fresh copy of my monster template up. The next thing I want is a CR calculator site or a D&D monster builder site. You could do all these calculations manually, but it just takes longer and overall is less practical because it's pretty detail oriented. Sadly, D&D Beyond does not have a monster CR calculator or an actual monster builder, which is an absolute travesty. The official D&D website for 4th edition had a fantastic monster builder, but how the heck 5e doesn't have something like that after a decade is really just unacceptable. You can create homebrew monsters on D&D Beyond, but you have to do all the work. It doesn't actually help you with calculating anything. It's basically just to produce a stat block image and to share it with others. Anyway, let's get rolling. I filled in the name on my template and deleted the spells and legendary action sections because this monster doesn't have either of those things. I've also put that it's CR2, which means its XP value is 450, and the proficiency bonus is +2. A monster's proficiency bonus is typically based on its CR, not its level. In fact, most monsters don't even have a level the way that characters do. Monsters have a number of hit dice, but those are distinct from the monster's challenge rating. The challenge rating generally indicates about how powerful a monster is in an encounter. Now the size, creature type, and alignment. The Ophaeo really seems person size in my imagination, so that means medium, which is a D8 hit die. Monsters' hit dice are typically based on their size category. D4 tiny, D6 small, D8 medium, D10 large, D12 huge, and D20 gargantuan. For creature type, I think monstrosity fits the best. It's kind of close to a humanoid, but just a bit too monstrous for that. It's not quite a fae, and it's not a fiend or a demon type thing. Chaotic evil is the alignment that fits the best. It's a sadistic, wild, mayhem and havoc causing thing. I'm going to give it the armor class and the hit points that I saw in the bandit captain, though this is just an estimate. These will probably get adjusted some as I go. I'm plugging this information into the CR calculator or the monster builder, which should already start giving us an idea of how the monster is shaping up stats wise. So with AC 15 and 65 hit points, the Ophaeo already has a defensive CR of 1. That is based on the monster statistics by challenge rating table in the Dungeon Master's Guide in the monster creation section. For speed, I think the Ophaeo is pretty mobile, more in terms of how versatile it is with its movement, not that it's, just lightning fast. So let's say it has a 40-foot speed on land and swimming in the water, and then half that for climbing, so a 20-foot climb speed. It climbs on sea rocks and cave walls and scales up the sides of houses and the villages at night, and of course it climbs onto the sides of ships and it clings on there. But it doesn't climb around crazy fast like a spider monkey. There isn't a hard rule on how speed affects a monster's CR, so you basically just have to make a judgment call. Is this monster so slow that its defensive CR should be considered 1 lower? Is the monster so fast that the characters have a difficult time affecting it, so its defensive CR should be considered 1 or maybe even 2 higher? I guess there is one thing that affects CR in this department. If a creature has a flying speed and ranged offense and is below CR 10, then you treat its AC as though it were 2 higher. Usually bumps up its defensive CR by 1. In the case of the Ophaeo, its mobility is a strong point, but not so much as to actually affect the CR directly. Now we move on to the creature's ability scores. This part you could actually do first if you wanted to, which is a good approach. We already know that its con modifier is +2 from those hit points I gave it. 10d8 plus 20, so thus +2 10 times. Con 14 seems like it fits this monster. It's pretty vigorous, but nothing exceptionally tough. I'll keep the strength 15 and dexterity 16 from the bandit captain. Those both also fit well, as this creature is decently strong and nimble, but again, nothing that's really high. I think intelligence 9 seems right. It's a little under the average human. I might drop this down to 7 though. Wisdom of 13, it's slightly gifted in terms of perceptiveness and instinct, and a charisma score of 7, as it's a nasty thing, bitter and gruff. Saving throws are next, though I don't think that it has any save proficiencies. I don't know, maybe I'll reconsider, but I'm just not sure if it's particularly great in any of these. And I try to resist the temptation to always give every single monster saving throw proficiencies. So is there a strong reason why it should be proficient in one of these? I just don't know. Maybe something will come up later on, especially if I tinker with writing some lore or developing the look of the thing. For skill proficiencies, stealth is what stands out to me. This is a lurker, a creeper, a clinging on under the water kind of thing, a clinging on to the side of a coastal fortress kind of thing. Other proficiencies would be things like tools, vehicles, etc. It doesn't have that. It's not vulnerable, resistant, or immune to anything. Nothing that I can think of, at least. Again, something specific might come up during the development of lore, and that could be cool, but nothing in the concept is jumping out at me, so I'll delete those lines. Now we're at senses. This is definitely a dark vision monster, like so many of them are. 60 feet seems fine. And passive perception is 10 plus the perception bonus, so in this case just the +1 from the wisdom. Languages. Well, I don't see this as a creature that leads with conversation, but it is intelligent and surely it knows a language. I think common probably makes the most sense. The thing lurks around humanoids, it preys on people, or at least upon their waterborne vessels, or perhaps their towns or coastal areas. Aquan is worth considering, but I hate to just slap Aquan on there because it's a water-based creature. It also could have a unique language of its own. Again, I'll see about that if I get into creating lore. I'm deleting the equipment line because I don't see this as a creature that has any kind of noteworthy combat gear. I think it probably just wears a loincloth or maybe a bit of seaweed. It probably also has trinkets that it's reeved, or maybe some bits of crude accessories in the form of bones or teeth. Kind of gives me a troll vibe in this regard. Now on to the traits. I know that it's amphibious. I think it's going to have a kind of limited amphibiousness. The Opheo can breathe air and water, but if it goes more than 4 hours without submerging, it quickly suffocates and withers into a husk. That fits the unsettling tone that this thing has. It might need another trait, maybe something related to damaging vehicles and structures. There is the siege monster trait that says this creature deals double damage to objects and structures. That might be good. It is a simple fit, though typically I see siege monster on creatures that are like big, powerful, brute monsters. And I don't know how well this Opheo could damage like stone or iron. I'll put siege monster on here for now, but I'll put these 3 question marks, something that I like to mark on there to help me remember that I need to make a decision or figure something out later. Now we come to actions. I like the claws plus radula tongue idea. So first the claw. It's an attack based on dexterity, kind of like a finesse weapon, so +5 to hit. 1d6 base damage die seems right. They aren't particularly big claws. Slashing damage works. I don't think the Opheo has ranged attacks. Now, how should the radula function? It's a sort of tongue-like organ. It has lots of tiny spikes that scrapes or saws. It doesn't seem like that would have much of a reach, though. Like maybe that would be a 0-foot reach? Or maybe it's only against a creature that the Opheo has grappled. It doesn't have to be an attack, though. So I'm going to type something out and see how this looks. Radula. The Opheo scrapes with a tongue-like organ covered in tiny teeth. It targets a creature within 5 feet of it that is grappled by the Opheo, incapacitated or restrained, or it targets a structure or unattended object within 5 feet of it. The target takes 3d4 slashing damage. A creature can make a DC 13 dexterity saving throw, taking half this damage on a success. This slashing damage ignores the damage threshold of objects and structures made of material no harder than stone. So I like this direction with the Radula, and I like the 3d4 damage dice. It kind of gives you a tactile representation of a bunch of minuscule spike teeth tearing at the target. However, the wording that I just wrote for this Radula action is a bit too clunky. I'm going to try a different version. I'm going to try rephrasing things. I want it to be smoother, more user-friendly. It also makes me realize that the Opheo's claws should grapple the target, which does make sense given how well it can cling on to things. So I've done another revision, and the claw now grapples, and the Radula feature reads like this. Radula. The Opheo scrapes with a tongue-like organ covered in tiny teeth. Target creature. The Opheo targets a creature within 5 feet of it that's grappled by the Opheo, incapacitated, or restrained. The target makes a DC 13 dexterity saving throw, taking 3d4 slashing damage on a failed save, or half damage on a successful one. Target object. The Opheo targets an object or structure within 5 feet of it. The object must not be carried or worn by another creature. The target takes 3d4 slashing damage, which ignores the damage threshold of objects and structures made of material no harder than stone. I like that much better. It's clearer, it's more practical to use. I'm also removing the siege monster trait as the Radula accomplishes the theme of it being effective against objects and structures, plus siege monster just didn't quite feel right. At this point, the Opheo has an offensive challenge rating of 1, which doesn't surprise me since it's not doing much damage, just 6 or 7 per round, with a +5 to hit, or a DC 13 save. A monster's final CR is the average of its defensive and offensive CRs. Generally, you want to err on the side of caution, though not always. Sometimes there are cases of things like dragons, for example, that are supposed to be a little extra powerful. So let's see how the Opheo looks with a multi-attack to increase its damage output. Multi-attack. The Opheo makes 2 claw attacks and uses Radula if possible. Well, that cranked up the damage quite a bit. That sends the offensive rating to a CR of 3. So average that out with the CR 1 defense, and that does end us up with a total CR of 2, which is our target. So do I like this guy? At this point, like if I stopped things right here and was done, would I be happy with it? Does it feel like CR2? It's good at this point to kind of take a step back and reflect on the creature as a whole. Does it really feel like or seem like the challenge rating that you're intending? Maybe compare it to some other creatures of the same challenge rating. Purely numbers-wise, the Opheo is looking fine, I would say. If I compare it to things like Griffin, Bandit Captain, Giant Elk, it does seem to be CR2. Not just from the statistics on the table, but also in comparison to those official monsters. And I think we're especially safe considering that it can't even use Radula against a creature unless it has that creature grappled. I also wonder if maybe its hit points are just slightly too high. They're not too high mechanics-wise, as in by the guidelines of the game, they're not too high. But they might be too high to fit the theme. Do I really feel like the Opheo is tougher than an ogre or a marrow or a griffin or a giant elk? I don't know. I'm not sure about that. So I'm going to see how things look if I nudge its AC up by 1 and nudge its hit points down by maybe removing 2 of its hit dice. That would kind of get it a little bit more in the direction of a creature that's a bit slippery, a bit spry, a bit tricksy, a little harder to hit, but not quite as physically tough. Here I've taken its AC up by 1 to a 16, and I've taken away 2 of its hit dice. So now it has 52 max hit points, derived from 8d8 plus 16. I do think this more accurately portrays old Slug Tongue, which I've just decided right now that Slug Tongue is another way that people refer to Opheos. Again, I'm asking myself at this point, does this monster feel done? What we have here is solid, and I can't really increase its power in terms of more per round damage dealing and so forth. but I kind of feel like it's slightly too simple, or maybe not quite unique enough. It has moderately high mobility on land and in water. It's slightly unique in its amphibious trait. It has a somewhat unique radula action that is kind of horrifying for characters to endure, and is pretty effective at tearing through ships or other structures over time. Those things are cool, though the overall Ophaeo is somewhat just a simple basic melee monster. Like I've seen so many times in my monster ranking videos, I just wish it had like one more feature, one extra touch of something special, something interesting. So what could that be? Maybe it has some kind of fear gaze. It can target any creatures within 30 feet of it, and those creatures make wisdom saves, and if they fail, they're frightened. That kind of fits the theme, though there are a bunch of monsters out there already that inflict the frightened condition. Maybe if the targets fail their wisdom save by 5 or more, they're incapacitated while they are frightened. That does fit the theme, and that would combo well with its radula being able to work against an incapacitated creature. Or maybe if a creature fails its dex save against the Ophaeo's radula, it like scrapes through some of its armor, and that reduces its AC by 1. Like every time it fails a dex save, the AC gets reduced by 1. Sort of like what happens with creatures like Grey Ooze or a Rust Monster. That would introduce a different layer of threat, a different dimension to this monster, and the characters might have incentive then to change up their tactics. That makes things a bit more interesting, a bit more dynamic. Maybe. These are decent ideas. These could work. It actually makes me think of something. I don't think the radula should be able to damage magic items. I just don't think the Ophaeo has what it takes to tear through magical objects. But another idea has come to me, something that I'm liking even better, something which is called knavish defense. If an attack would hit the Ophaeo while it is grappling a smaller, larger creature, it can use its reaction to gain a +3 bonus to AC against that attack. After the attack resolves, the Ophaeo can release the grapple and spring away, moving up to 20 feet without provoking opportunity attacks. This gives it a nice reaction speed maneuver that expresses its mobility theme and its scampish, roguish theme. I can also easily imagine how the Ophaeo sometimes will want to let go of a grapple and get out of melee. I should probably take its AC back down to 15 in this case, since once per round, it can feasibly bump its AC up by 3 to avoid a hit. I think that's a pretty reliable thing that it can do. I think this is now looking good in terms of a stat block and a monster concept. You can really spend a long time, as long as you want, creating a monster, especially if it's one of those more complex monsters. You can really spend a long time putting one together. But for GMs who enjoy this sort of thing, that is time well spent. It's a pleasure. I think what I'm going to do with the Ophaeo is I'm going to spend a little bit of time thinking about and developing its lore, maybe get some kind of illustration going for it. I think what I'll actually do is I'll put it in my August newsletter, Scrolls of the Bard. So if you're subscribed to my Patreon, you'll get a notification when that post goes up, or you can also sign up for the mailing list, and just every month you get it into your email inbox, the newsletter, Scrolls of the Bard, and the RPG maps. So that's a real convenient way to do it as well. Again, links for everything are down below in the video description. So there you have it. 2 great methods for creating a D&D monster. One is simple and fast, but you have to just kind of take what you can get. And then the other one is very detailed. It takes a lot longer, but it's very customizable. You can create anything that you can think of. This was a very interesting walkthrough of my process of monster design and walking through some of my behind the scenes thoughts. Maybe I'll do another video like this in the future, especially if it's something that you all seem to enjoy. Thank you for watching, everyone, and an extra special thank you and bardic bow of gratitude to all my supporters over on Patreon. You guys help make this channel everything that it is. Until we meet again, may your adventures be many.